Hey everybody, it's me, Dolores, the pastor's daughter. In today's video, I wanted to read to you from the book entitled, Don't You Know Who I Am? How to Stay Sane in an Era of Narcissism, Entitlement, and Incivility. It is by Dr. Ramani Durvasula. So in today's video, we are going to be reading from chapter 7, and it's entitled The Narcissist Who Raised You. Now, just a brief overview. First of all, I love Dr. Ramani. I've taken a few classes by her. And when I first started this journey in discovering who my father was, and my father is a narcissistic pastor, I just did a wide search and tried to find all the information that I could so that I could learn what to do, how to do, what is narcissism, what is this thing. And so I found Dr. Ramani, and she has been an excellent resource. In this book, this chapter really resonates with me because it is like down to a T of what I have dealt with my father. And probably like many of you who grew up with a narcissistic parent, then you will probably resonate with the things that she shares in this chapter as well. So let's get started. So the chapter starts off with a quote that says, "Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them." James Baldwin. And the chapter reads like this. Many people met their very first narcissist on their first day on this planet. It was their mother, their father, or both. People with narcissistic parents often have no other reality. As such, it shapes who they are and become. It can take some heavy psychological lifting to get past growing up this way and making healthy choices as an adult. A toxic parent engages in the established patterns of narcissism. That's a lack of empathy, self-centeredness, arrogance, unchecked rage, grandiosity, and deep entitlement. Basically, it is a situation in which the parent chronically puts his or her needs first and the needs of everyone else second. There are myriad possible reasons for these toxic patterns. Parents who are toxic are often narcissistic, but there may also be other patterns ranging from untreated psychopathology, personality disorders, particularly borderline, narcissistic, and antisocial personality disorders, as well as passive-aggressive patterns, and substance abuse to the parent's own history of having toxic parents. This can be a transgenerational issue. No matter what the reason, it is not the child's responsibility to be patient with or address the parent's issues, period. Children do not have the luxury of knowing or even understanding that their parent is a narcissist. With few exceptions, children want to believe their parents are heroes and caregivers and will give their parents thousands of chances to get it right. Partially, this is adaptive. If the child does get the validation of the parent, then the child will be kept safe by the adult. But mostly, it is reflexive, and most parents start from an advantageous position. If you feed this little person, he or she will like you. The job gets more demanding as it goes. Parents set a primitive tone for us, and the fact is that no one gets it just right. Parents' sadness, worries, disappointments, psychopathology, and distraction all become the stuff of their children's development and become the only reality or normal the child experiences. Parents are people, and their history does not magically disappear when they have a child. Extending that to what we discussed before about habituation, these familiar patterns become normalized, and we often replay them in numerous ways in adult life. One narcissistic, entitled, toxic parent can steer the course of a childhood in a permanent way and can impact adulthood until the end of life. Parenting and narcissism do not mix. The key requirements of parenting, consistency, empathy, compromise, sacrifice, self-awareness, discipline, and equanimity, are precisely the qualities that narcissists lack. The analogy I have used with numerous clients is that the experiences we have or endure as children are like etchings or echoes. These experiences don't define people, but they also cannot be denied. The echo, the faint mark, is always there. At the most extreme, it is like experiencing an injury in childhood. It may always give you some aches and pains as an adult, but it doesn't have to restrict you. The awareness of these dynamics how they impact a person, and how they continue to play out can be used to enable behavioral change in different kinds of choices. The key characteristics of a narcissistic parent. In writing this book, I spoke with dozens of people with toxic narcissistic parents. Their stories are heartbreaking because not only did the narcissism make for difficult and painful childhoods, but also the scars and damage wrought by their toxic parents impacted their sense of worth and their decision-making in relationships throughout their adult lives. Their stories, however, are sometimes triumphant. They did not allow their parents' toxicity to do them in. They found strength within themselves, and they took their lives back despite their self-doubt. Some key things emerged over the course of the interviews. While these were not true of every parent, these were themes that multiple respondents highlighted in terms of how their parents' toxicity manifested. These themes range from invalidation to emotional distance, to control and competitiveness, to inconsistency and poor boundaries. The first one is invalidation. Toxic parents make everything about them. Your triumph, your losses, the day you gave birth, a family funeral, the day you go in and get chemotherapy. Regardless of the topic or situation, they turn it back to themselves. Their children's needs are secondary and typically met only if they align with the needs of the parent. They lie to their children about family issues and chronically second-guess and gaslight their children well into adulthood, often asking questions like, "Are you sure?" or stating, "You don't know what you're talking about." Narcissistic parents engage in petty quid pro quos. They feel slighted by their children. They will punish them in some way. This could range from not speaking to you to deliberately forgetting your birthday, to not coming to an event that is important to you. Again, these are patterns that respondents reported happening during their childhood and adulthood with toxic parents. Any feelings that are or were expressed are often denied or minimized, which represents the worst of both gaslighting and invalidation. Another theme that surfaced was the feeling that other people in the family system want the person to get over it, just to keep the peace and avoid having to face down the toxic family member. This means that other family members do not listen to the person, which becomes a form of family gaslighting. Toxic parents also participated in parental gaslighting. Parents denied the events that occurred during the childhood of those interviewed. And after finding the courage after years to confront their parents, their recollections and feelings were doubted or denied by their parent. Emotional distance. The people I interviewed also reported that their parents were cold and distant. This is a form of parental abandonment because the parents could not handle, manage, or be bothered with parenting. The parent may have provided for basic needs, meals on the table, clean clothes, but there was absolutely no emotional get from the parent, either warmth or empathy. This also arched into literal abandonment. Respondents share stories of being left with the other parent, step-parents, or grandparents, and being unclear about when the parent would return. Control and authoritarianism. People who have narcissistic parents said they were authoritarian, controlling, tyrannical, and demanded blind obedience. They often split family members so that if the child created a close alliance with the other parent, the toxic parent attempted to undercut that. The toxic parent also attempted to do this if the siblings banded together, or if a grandparent, aunt, or uncle allied with the child. They impeded adolescent children from becoming more independent and criticized them in a manner that sapped their independence. Narcissistic parents can be quite inconsistent, at times shaming their children for lacking independence, and then impeding their children when they attempted to be individual. Toxic parents also sabotage friendships that might have provided the child with confidence and other support. This also included relationships with close family members, coaches, and other mentors or teachers in the community. Respondents reported a consistent pattern of parental gaslighting, acknowledging that when they experienced physical discomfort or had an emotional reaction, their parents told them that they were overreacting or being too dramatic. The parents' mood and expectations were the law of the land, and anyone who did not adhere to these edicts would face harsh consequences. Poor boundaries and lack of safety. Poor boundaries included encroaching into their child's life in a way that was intrusive, behaving inappropriately with their child's friends, and showing up unannounced. These parents demanded that their children become high achievers or engage in activities, jobs, or fields of study that were consistent with the parents' interests or aspirations, with little regard for whether the children found these activities interesting. As adults, respondents admitted that their toxic parent would criticize the respondent's own parenting, especially if that parenting was characterized by warmth, empathy, flexibility, and connection. A few interviewees talked about the experience of family mobbing, whereby narcissistic and toxic parents would organize the other family members to curry their favor to scapegoat one child within the family system. And if that person decided to distance themselves from the family, he or she was written off as ungrateful, aloof, or a problem child. The narcissistic parents also made choices that put the child in harm's way, including allowing people into the home that may have sexually or physically abused the child, and keeping that dangerous person around because it fed the ego and the needs of the parent, despite the harm coming to the child. Respondents also mentioned having fearful parents who were in the relationship with the toxic parent and did not protect the child, but instead continued to single-mindedly provide narcissistic supply for the toxic parent, resulting in the negligence of their children. Sometimes both parents were toxic and would act as a tag team and defend each other. Why do you criticize your mother? This would be particularly damaging and painful because the child would not have a reality check, any kind, within the family system. This is a dynamic that continued into adulthood for several respondents. Superficiality. The people I interviewed also reported that their toxic parent expressed disproportionate concern about what other people would think about their family and less genuine concern about the children. Their parents were chameleons who were able to put on a good show for other people, which was confusing to the children. Hearing that their parent was so helpful and wonderful when they were having a very different experience at home. Due to their own grandiosity, these parents expected their children to be great. So while there was a sense of being encouraged and cheered on in whatever activity they were doing, it was in the name of greatness for the parent and the public face of the family, and not necessarily for the pleasure of the activity or the happiness of the child. The impacts a narcissistic parent can have on a child. Because I interviewed adults, they all shared the impacts that growing up with a toxic parent or narcissistic parent had on them in adulthood. The effect of this kind of parent, especially when they did not understand it, often lasted into adulthood. However, once they became educated about their parents' narcissism, sociopathy, passive-aggressive behavior, and other toxic patterns, many were able to heal and create full and satisfying lives. Some of the most common impacts they experienced included a childhood riddled with insecurity, confusion, a lack of safety, a sense of anxiety, fear, sadness, lack of confidence, and loss of their sense of self, punishment if they ever attempted to advocate for themselves, and the clear message that to advocate for themselves was unacceptable, a sense of survivalism. Children in these situations learned to do what they needed to do to please or appease their toxic parent. They also became masterful at jumping through hoops and addressing their unpleasable parents' needs, regardless of the toll it took on the child, having to meet their own needs on the sly or in secrecy in order to protect themselves. Experiencing a range of physical symptoms was not uncommon for these children. It is stressful to grow up like this, and not surprisingly, several people reported having varied physical symptoms during childhood, including migraines and headaches, cold sores, chronic gastrointestinal issues, hives, and skin rashes. Chronically, having to appease the parent, but their parents would rarely appease them. Instead, they would more often criticize them. At one point, nearly every child believed he or she was the problem and kept trying to be better, so that his or her parent would be happy. Confusion about feelings of just wanting to leave the parent when they were old enough to move out, but a lack of confidence or a sense of guilt from abandoning the parent. The kinds of impact that trailed people into adulthood included psychiatric and psychological issues, low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, using drugs or alcohol to manage their feelings, suicidal thoughts, self-harming behaviors, the inability to value themselves or feel that they are worthy, that they are enough, choosing a narcissistic, toxic, or controlling partner, choosing partners who are invalidating, demeaning, critical, contemptuous, dehumanizing, or abusive. For many of them, this was a cycle that repeated for years. It felt like a natural extension of the childhood pattern of providing narcissistic supply, silencing their own needs, and living under conditions of insecurity and inconsistency. Sadly, being with an abusive person at a primitive level felt like home. Difficulty accepting kindness or assistance from other people, having their own challenges with empathy and entitlement as adults, being overly empathic with other people as an adult, and being taken advantage of because of this. Not feeling as though they had the right to boundaries with their parent or with anyone else in their lives. Running themselves into the ground and trying to do too much for other people. After the fact, many of them recognized that this was a pattern that was a byproduct of feeling that they were loved only for doing, and that this was the only way they thought that someone would want to have them in their lives. Losing out on professional opportunities because they did not feel confident enough to accept a promotion or other advancement, or struggling at work because of indecisiveness and self-deprecation. Periods of grief. Several people reported feeling robbed of a childhood or a family once they realized what the patterns were. They recognized that they had fought for having a sense of family or a childhood and kept throwing themselves back in because they so desperately wanted to have loving parents and a sense of family. The unstable foundation laid by a toxic and narcissistic parent can impact a child in numerous ways, as we've seen from the behaviors and experiences reported by those interviewed. In the following section, I will outline some of the most common patterns, their effect on the child, and how these patterns can play out into adulthood. Persistent neglect and/or negation. Narcissistic parents may be so caught up in their own lives and pursuits that they are unwilling or unable to make the sacrifice that all children require. It can impact the child in very real and practical ways. The parent does not prepare appropriate meals at meal times, does not show up on time or pick up the child from school or activities, or does not adhere to a bedtime or other routines. The subtle impacts are even more far-reaching and often manifest as not listening to the child, interrupting the child, maintaining little interest or curiosity in the child, and criticizing, belittling, and humiliating the child. If the toxic parent is not interested in the child at any given moment, he or she does not notice the child. This is not to say that a busy parent will always get it wrong. Many people beautifully balance the demands of careers, other life stressors, and parenting. It's about being consistent, present, and mindful. This does not always manifest as physical or environmental neglect. The child may be well-fed, clothed, housed, enrolled in school, and taken on vacation. It is more of an emotional neglect. There is little interest in the child's internal world, but the physical is managed well, and sometimes very well, leaving other people thinking that the child actually has a perfectly loving life. It's like having plenty of food, but still starving to death. Effect on the child. In cases where needs are not being met, obviously this can leave children not only physically at risk, but also without the consistent mirror of, as described earlier in chapter 5, or with an insecure attachment to the parent. These children may chronically attempt to curry the favor of their parent, but over time, if the neglect is persistent and pervasive enough, the children may simply lose interest and withdraw entirely. How does this play out into adulthood? Some people in this situation have become fully estranged from their family and parents. They may have been forced to be self-reliant and have often succeeded in that. Or the situation may have forced them into risky or suboptimal situations, such as dropping out of school or entering into a dangerous relationship to secure a place to live. Sadly, some people coming from this situation will find that they have numbed themselves and cut off their emotional worlds and are now unable to connect to others as adults. often feeling distant and disconnected. But it is also possible that this setup sets up a need for validation that pushes a child raised like this to keep seeking validation in some form from others, teachers, peers, the world at large, while never becoming confident in his or her sense of being good enough. Sadly, sometimes the patterns of childhood neglect and negation can result in adults who look narcissistic themselves, which makes sense, since the core dynamic of narcissism is insecurity. Unfortunately, narcissistic parents can leave their children feeling not good enough in perpetuity. This need for validation can play out rather badly in adult relationships. The adults may seek out narcissistic partners who allow this dynamic to repeat, or other negating situations in which a lifetime can be spent trying to prove themselves, as though doing so will fix the neglectful, negating childhood. Inconsistency. Toxic and narcissistic parents are inconsistent in all ways, not only in practical matters such as routines, but also in how they interact with their children. At times, they are over-involved and almost inappropriate with boundaries or indulgence, and at other times, they are completely disconnected and uninterested. These vacillations typically vary based on the parent's needs, with little regard for the child. If the parents need attention, they will turn to the child for it. If the parents cannot be bothered with the headache of the child, they will ignore the child or only intermittently interact with him or her. Narcissistic parents regularly break promises and have complex rationalizations for breaking them. They rarely follow through with obligations on a regular basis, often not showing up to concerts or soccer games, or rarely showing up on time to pick children up from school or some other place. Narcissistic parents engage in conditional parenting, showing these children affection when they do what their parents want, but withholding it when they do not. In many ways, narcissistic parents treat children as conveniences or inconveniences. When the child is convenient, they are guests in the house and they want to play at being Uber parent, or their child has just given a brilliant performance and they want to soak up the adulation being placed on their child, then they will be highly attentive to the child. But at times when the child is an impediment, making demands when the parent wants to be doing something else, or asking to play some board game for the 100th time, the narcissistic parent will tune out. Or even at times when the child is making no demand, but the parent is having a bad day, the narcissistic parent will be unable to step out of himself or herself long enough to check in with the child. No parent gets it right all the time. As psychoanalysts such as David Winnicott notes, it is enough to be the good enough parent. That is to say, to get it right much of the time. Sadly, the narcissistic parent falls well under that threshold, and the not good enough parent yields a child who retains the not good enough sense of self for decades. The effect on the child. Inconsistency can leave children confused, anxious, destabilized, insecure, and feeling like they are always walking on eggshells. Every time, they may get savvier at figuring out the parent's patterns and will get wise. They may determine whether it is at a specific time of day or under other conditions when they are valued and focus on those. The children also start to learn that they are valued only for certain aspects of themselves, which can set them up for recognizing that the only way to bring any consistency into their lives is to live conditionally and provide the parent with what the parent wants. This kind of inconsistency can result in chronic anxiety for the child, who may start to have difficulties in school or with attention, or may even invent unusual behaviors. How does this play out in adulthood? Again, much like neglect and negation, this pattern can also impact attachment and can make the world seem like an unsafe and unpredictable place. In adulthood, this can play out in several ways, including the extreme of being over-controlled to an almost compulsive degree to get the sense of consistency that often eluded them. The inconsistent mirror and inconsistent sense of self can also result in difficulties with emotional regulation, a sense of not being enough, and an almost painful sensitivity to others, to the degree that people who come from this type of environment may be at greater risk of monitoring all of the people in their environment and constantly shape-shifting to please them. This can set someone up for falling into narcissistic relationships of all kinds in adulthood. Competitiveness. Toxic and narcissistic parents tend to be highly competitive with their children, which can manifest as a pattern of jealousy, particularly as the child becomes older and they are in competition with their child. Even when their children are young, toxic parents may grow resentful that their child is garnering more attention than they are receiving, or may push their children to fight or try harder. This can play out in a number of ways, including frank competition with the child, actually trying to be better at the thing the child is doing or reflecting on their glory days of that particular activity, playing down the child's accomplishments. Back in my day, it was much more difficult to win at one of these competitions. Not showing up to a competition or a performance, or leaving the room when the child's achievements are being discussed. Paradoxically, it is often toxic or narcissistic parents who shunt the child into the single-minded pursuit of excellence in a particular activity. And yet, it is also their inability to get their own ego out of the way that blocks them from praising their child's efforts. The child may be praised only when he or she wins and never recognized for effort unless it culminates in a win. The narcissistic parent may be covetous or jealous, a pattern that can persist through their relationship with their child. Effect on the child. The effect on the child is commonly guilt at outshining the parent or making the parent feel uncomfortable. In some cases, there is also resentment, but guilt is often the leading emotion here, and can even make the child ambivalent about his or her achievements. This can present as self-sabotage to avoid winning or discomfort with winning, which can ultimately manifest in adulthood as an inability to own accomplishments or the feeling of survivor's guilt in succeeding. They may look humble, but the humility is often a frank denial of their achievements. Finally, children raised under these circumstances may experience significant anxiety and also become physically ill before a competition, as well as experience a loss of love of the game because the entire process has become so co-opted by the competitive needs of the parent. For these children, holidays and birthdays are often ruined because a toxic parent cannot endure other people receiving attention, or people are not behaving precisely as they want during the family gathering. How does this play out into adulthood? In adults, this bizarre parental competition can actually become even more heightened. If you do actually wind up having greater success than your parent, he or she may still criticize it and devalue the quality of your career, home, or objects. If your spouse is kind and loving or different than in the relationship you had with your parent, the parent may denigrate your spouse or your marriage. Narcissistic parents are threatened by their adult children's accomplishments or joys and minimize them, trivialize them, or take responsibility for them. Sadly, people with toxic or narcissistic parents often will keep trying to please them and impress them, whether that is purchasing them gifts, big or small. I have heard about people who did have significant success and went so far as to purchase the toxic parent a home or a car, only to have the parent complain about the features or location, and the adult child looked as devastated as a small child whose parents may have mocked a drawing that he or she made. Many people report that the competitive parent ruined their wedding day because the parent encroached upon the arrangements as though it was his or her big day, and found it difficult to tolerate the adulation heaped upon the bride or groom, or because a narcissistic parent needed to ensure it was a big enough show to outshine other family members. This competitive dynamic can also result in feelings of guilt especially if the child's life or outcomes far surpass that of the competitive narcissistic parent, instead of being able to enjoy well-earned accomplishments or even just lucky twist of fate. There can be a sense of guilt that pervades all successes. Toxic parent can cast a long shadow. Rage. Parenting is difficult, and even on the best day for the best parent, it can be frustrating. Since toxic or narcissistic people do not tolerate frustration or disappointment in any form, parenting can be a disaster for them, as there is a propensity for terrifying rage in the face of normal parenting moments. The rage can be targeted at anyone, and at times, the rage is unrelated to the child's behavior, but may be a manifestation of other issues in the parent's day, including relationship problems, work difficulties, or just being something in the narcissistic parent's life that did not go the way he or she wanted. Parental rage may manifest as loud screaming, cruel insults, "You ruined my life," throwing objects, unreasonable and disproportionate punishments, physical violence, or storming away without letting the child or others know where they are going or when they will return. Effect on the child. It is terrifying to grow up with a rageful parent. It foments a sense of unpredictability, and the child will often wind up spending their childhood walking on eggshells to ensure that they do not contribute to the likelihood of an explosive anger, explosive rage, or that they get out of the way of one. This can also communicate and model to the child that dysregulation is acceptable and can contribute to a sense of fear. There is much excellent work in writing on child abuse, and this is not meant to be an overview of these issues, as they are beyond the scope of this book. Abuse can put a child at long-term psychological and physical risks, as well as at behavioral risks that can have long-term ramifications, including mental illness, substance abuse, self-harm, risky behaviors, and criminal behavior. For further and more specific readings on these issues, please search out resources specific to adult survivors of child abuse. There are many excellent nonprofit organizations that provide referrals, information sheets, and advocacy. How does this play out into adulthood? Consistent exposure to rage in childhood can have various ramifications in adulthood, depending on the extent and impact of the rage. Obviously, the most abusive rage, and that accompanied by direct or observed physical violence, can contribute to the likelihood of mood and anxiety disorders, substance abuse, and impulse control disorders, PTSD, or personality disorders. If the rage manifests as chronic verbal abuse, such as screaming and yelling, it can lead to a greater likelihood of anxiety, difficulties with distractibility and concentration, post-traumatic stress symptoms, and self-doubt, as well as foster a hypervigilant walking on eggshells style after years of growing up in an unpredictable, rageful situation. Dangerously, this can increase the likelihood of entering into an abusive or toxic relationship. Exposure to this dynamic may increase the likelihood of rage in adulthood in the child exposed to it, or at least difficulty regulating strong emotions such as rage. Scapegoating. Narcissistic parents can sometimes scapegoat one child in the family system. Often they will choose the child they are most threatened by. It's paradoxical, as they may scapegoat the child they most need because that child is a source of validation or is a high achiever. They will also scapegoat this child for reasons that otherwise threaten their public persona. For example, the child may exhibit characteristics or have an appearance that the parent feels unacceptable. It is as though the shame of needing the child results in projection of negative thoughts and behaviors onto that child. Among many of the people interviewed for this book, the scapegoated children were either the oldest, more successful, had more friends, or were more intelligent than their siblings, or posed some other threat to the ego of the parent. The parent may even have felt competitive with the child. This is an extraordinarily painful dynamic for the child, who may feel as though the entire family system is conspiring to bully him or her, and highlights fears of ostracism and isolation. It is not usual within a narcissistic family system. It is not unusual within a narcissistic family system, in addition to the scapegoated child, for there to also be the golden child, a role that is not always a simple one. They may receive the best of the narcissistic parent's acclaim, but they may also feel beholden to the parent, responsible for the parent, or even a sense of survivor guilt for being the chosen one, while other siblings was being scapegoated. Interestingly, many golden children will report that they found it even more difficult to distance themselves from the narcissistic parent as adults for a complex set of reasons, including guilt, fear, confusion, duty, and obligation. Narcissistic parents' inability to differentiate between themselves and their children can lead to patterns such as rejection and envy. They will rally the other children or other stakeholders in the family system against the child. And siblings may join in to create a stronger alliance with them, because these siblings too may feel competitive or jealous of the child or fear the narcissistic parent. In the most extreme cases, the scapegoated child in the family in this system will be abused, while other children do not experience abuse, a dynamic that negatively impacts all siblings within the family system. The effect on the child. Isolation, fear, and post-traumatic symptoms can be observed. Children may also be deeply confused as to why they were the sole target of the parent in a situation in which there are other siblings. This dynamic is obviously psychologically and potentially physically harmful to the child, but it also negatively affects other siblings in the family system who may subsequently feel guilt for participating or have survivor guilt for not being the target of the abuse or for not attempting to save their sibling. It may also model scapegoating behavior for the other children in the family, which they may take into future relationships. How does this play out into adulthood? The scapegoated child may be very untrusting as an adult and may find it difficult not only to trust in intimate relationship, but also to trust other systems. There can be real fear that within groups of friends, in school, or in work settings, the scapegoating dynamic may replicate. There may also be long-term psychological and psychiatric fallout, manifested through mental illness, risky behavior, or other maladaptive behaviors such as substance use. Over and under indulgence. Parents who are narcissistic and entitled are on when it works for them to be on, and off when they are off. Their onness and offness do not tend to mirror what the child needs. They just reflect where the parents are. When narcissistic parents do accurately mirror what the child wants, it is typically just a happy coincidence, which can be more difficult for the child in the long run, who believes the parents can get it right, not knowing that the times they did get it right are likely just luck of timing, rather than the parents being connected in any meaningful manner. This pattern tends to be materially and superficially overindulgent. The theme park parent who is good for the big moment, the parent who purchases all of the latest electronic gadgets, but emotionally underindulgent or altogether absent, has no interest in really noticing or listening to the child when it is about feelings, vulnerabilities, or anything else that is not gratifying to the parent. It can be quite confusing for children who may have a comfortable home, plenty of toys, lovely clothes, and even lots of other interesting experiences, like vacations, yet who are rarely, if ever, heard or listened to. Their emotional and internal worlds are completely underindulged. Effect on the child. Children in an over and underindulgent situation are confused. There can be some guilt that emanates from this because on one level, their lives look cool and interesting, as there is often a wealth of stuff, but on another level, there is little time or awareness from their parents. When I have worked with clients who experience this pattern of over and underindulgence as a child, more than once, they have said that they would have traded in the material stuff for an emotionally available parent. Children often receive the message from their parents that their material needs are being met, so asking for anything more is hubris. You have everything a kid could want. What else do you want? Children may not understand or be able to articulate that they have other needs and will often just participate in the superficial stuff and needs that are being met, but miss out on the crucial period of developing an emotional vocabulary and an intrinsic value system. That was a little struggle. How does this play out into adulthood? There may be a tendency for people to over and underindulge themselves in adulthood. This may play out in seeking solace in superficial pursuits, such as shopping or acquiring expensive items, but not attending to their own emotional and internal needs. The echoes of guilt and confusion that may accompany this pattern may also surface as disappointment and frustration, a pattern that may be carried into adult relationships or a pattern of falling into relationships with people who provide well materially, but not emotionally. Over and underindulgence can also be a setup for their own narcissism in adulthood, because they were taught to regulate through external stimuli rather than internal modulation, the mini-me. In some cases, narcissistic parents will have an obsessive zeal for their children. They are typically not interested in the day-to-day work of parenting, diapers, homework, tantrums, coordinating the minutiae of a child's life. But they are the masters of grand gestures, gifts, adventures, trips, Instagram posts. In addition, grandiose narcissists view the child as an extension of themselves, so they appear to tirelessly campaign for their child, advocating for the child with the soccer coach, greasing the skids to get the child into a particular college or private school, or getting the child connected with people associated with the family business. Not for the sake of the child per se, although it may look like that in the world or to the world, but rather because they, as parents, want to ensure that they look good to the world, that they maintain the family brand, that their child shows the world their greatness. Throughout this process, there is little attention paid to the child's inner and emotional world. These parents do not really see the child. They puppeteer the child. The child, in essence, becomes a grandiose accessory effect on the child. Children of these kinds of grandiose narcissistic parents may spend their childhoods focused on achievements, as it is the only way to curry favor with the narcissistic parent. They also recognize that if they do not go along with their parents' agenda for them, they will be rejected. And it is conditional love at the most basic level. How does this play out into adulthood? These children of these grandiose narcissists can remain puppets and seek validation from domineering parents. If mini-me children try to curb their own niche in the world as an adult, for example, their families to choose a school that better suits their interests, avoid the family business because they would rather become an artist, or marry someone the parents don't feel is worthy of the family, then rejection is quite likely to follow. Adults who were raised in the mini-me scenario can often struggle with a sense of feeling imprisoned by guilt and familial expectations. Can or should you maintain contact as an adult? Many people are unwilling to break up with or divorce their parents. They value family, want their children to have grandparents, still want to be connected to other extended family or siblings, or maintain hope after years of abuse that things might turn around. In some cases, parents become disabled or ill with age, and their adult children feel a sense of responsibility for them. Because of this desire to preserve the family relationship, many of those I interviewed reported a tendency to continue to uphold the old patterns simply to stay in the relationship. They may be independent and well put together adults in their regular lives, but around their parents, they feel ineffectual and powerless. They still find themselves taking disproportionate and distorted ownership for what happened while they were children. There were risks to maintaining these relationships, but also varied strategies for managing them. At the end of it all, as with all history, you cannot unring a bell, but you can think about it and behave differently. One story that stayed with me was that of a woman who had a brutally narcissistic and verbally abusive father. Throughout her childhood, he was prone to frequent and frightening rages, and he was cruel to her mother, who ultimately left him. Life went on. He lost most people. He no longer had a partner, and none of her siblings wanted anything to do with him. The woman I interviewed lived about an hour away from him. She said that he remained a difficult, critical, and cold, but ultimately sad and pitiful man. Approximately every 2 weeks, she went to see him. She would check on him and ensure that he had groceries and other basic items that he needed. She would privately set a timer on her phone when she arrived. She found that about 90 minutes was as long as she could last before he became toxic, and when the timer went off, she would leave before that happened. When asked why she kept going to see him, she admitted that they didn't really talk about anything. Sometimes they just sat next to each other and watched TV. She said, "He didn't deserve to see me. I could have walked away from him forever with no guilt. He hurt all of us. But I recognized that I did not go there for him. I went there for me. The person I am is empathetic. The person I am is kind. And I was not going to leave an old man with no one seeing him for the rest of his life. In trying to reject him, I was worried I would lose myself. And to retain my authenticity, I kept visiting him. But to retain my sanity, I would set an alarm to get out of there before it got too toxic. I could not spend the rest of my life being angry that he was an asshole, because then I would keep living in that resentment, and it would feel like he was still abusing me. I have no expectations from him to be caring or kind or respectful. I just don't want a sad old man to die alone. He doesn't really feel like a father." Her story stayed with me because it represented the hybrid that is possible for people if people can let go of their expectations, remain true to themselves, and find a middle ground that doesn't leave them feeling victimized on an ongoing basis. It's just one story. I heard just as many that involved people walking away from toxic parents forever, and they were thriving and happy because they no longer had to face those situations. And I heard many stories from people who just kept taking the abuse and felt helpless to change it. How to navigate a relationship with a narcissistic parent and protect yourself. Do not engage with a toxic parent except in the most superficial way. Stick to simple topics such as the weather, the gray rock strategy. Do not engage when the toxic parent triggers you, purposely or not. Accept that the parent will not change. Protect your own partner. You may continue to engage with your toxic parent, but your partner may not want to witness or experience your parent's behavior. Do not invite parents to significant events that you know they will ruin or make about themselves, like weddings, christenings, birthday parties, and holidays. And if you must invite them, assign someone to be their handler, to manage them so you don't need to. Engage in minimal contact. Minimize phone calls, physical contact, and text messaging. Remove toxic parents from your social media feeds. Does having a toxic parent affect your own parenting? Many people reported that the moment when they recognized that having toxic and narcissistic parents impacted their own parenting was chilling, and it wound up being a real call to arms. Everyone I interviewed was deeply committed to not repeating the errors of their parents. Nearly all of them talked about how important it was for them to be clear and honest with their children, and to never gaslight them or question their reality. In many cases, the history of having toxic parents made them vulnerable to poor relationship choices as adults. This subsequent impact on their own children, because those toxic partners became toxic parents, they committed to working on themselves and remaining aware of the impact their own poor relationship choices were having on their children. Some acknowledged having children as a way to be loved unconditionally, or finally create a functional relationship, while others noted that they did not have children because they did not feel as though they were up to the psychological challenge of being a parent, or that after a lifetime of taking care of a parent, they did not want to take on the responsibility of taking care of a child. I refuse to believe that having a narcissistic, sociopathic, psychopathic, or invalidating parent is a permanent destiny. I have worked directly with and observed people who endured these situations emerge with empathy and grace intact. Their adult struggles were more around self-doubt, second-guessing, and personal invalidation. I have also observed people who were crushed by these situations and found it nearly impossible to connect with their emotional worlds, other people, and a sense of safety in the world. They may even find themselves lashing out at others as their parents lashed out at them. Your own inborn temperament can have an impact on how well you weather this storm. Certain temperaments are more protective against the onslaught of abusive parents. Perhaps the simplest shift is in language. Many people who have survived narcissistic parents think of themselves as victims and write themselves off as people who will never be able to fully emotionally available to others. I disagree. The better word is survivor. That simple shift in vocabulary from victim to survivor may arm you with enough strength to recognize that what happened with your parents happened to you, and you are not responsible for it. Nor do you need to replicate those patterns with your own children. What happened is a heavy load to carry. You can give yourself permission to put it down. The ultimate goal is then to elevate the term from survivor to thriver, parent. Pity children who have two narcissistic or toxic parents, and it happens quite often because it can be harrowing. In some cases, the children become de facto parents for themselves, quickly learning to take care of things for themselves or to chronically walk on eggshells. In the absence of any advocate within the home, some children may have the good fortune to have a benevolent grandparent, godparent, aunt, uncle, or other adult stakeholder. Children from the double narcissistic parent household have a steep mountain to climb. The attachment issues raised by this situation can set them up for a range of mental health issues in adulthood. If a child is raised by a single parent and that parent is a narcissist, it can also have the same impact as having two narcissistic parents because there is nowhere to receive empathy, assurance, consistency, or safety. However, in most cases, the toxic parent is a solo act. It can be the mother or father or stepmother or stepfather. This dynamic can be doubly painful. Not only are the children suffering from the impact of having a toxic parent and all of the fallout that accompanies that, but also they may be witnessing how badly the toxic parent treats the other parent. In some cases, the non-toxic parent is the one who really saves the children by creating an attachment with them, caring for them, and loving them. But that non-toxic parent may also be distracted by the demands of managing the toxic spouse, because he or she will be enduring his or her own form of toxic abuse. Parenting can then go down in one of two ways. In one way, non-narcissistic parents will attempt to protect or advocate for the child as well as they can and will be present with the child whenever possible. In these cases, it can be frustrating for the child, who deeply craves and values the time with this loving parent and will often come to resent the toxic parent for making all of their lives so miserable. This child may also become resentful and confused about why the loving parent sticks around for the abuse that doesn't end it. In the other way, the non-narcissistic parent who means well is so paralyzed by the toxic partner that he or she is not able to be there for the child as regularly as needed. The toxic parent in some ways becomes like a louder, more problematic child that the other parent needs to deal with mealtimes, vacations, and day-to-day life catering to the toxic parent. In some cases, there can be deep resentment that the non-toxic parent cannot stop giving all of himself or herself to appeasing and taking care of the toxic parent. The relationship with the other parent into adulthood can become quite complex for the children of narcissists, peppered with love and protection, but also ongoing resentment about not advocating for them, for keeping them in the toxic situation, for not offering them better explanations when they were children, so they did not blame themselves or their toxic parents for their toxic parents' treatment of them. The damage of a toxic parent on a family system is far-reaching and impacts not only the relationship between the child and the toxic parent, but also the relationship amongst all other family members. When parents divorce and there is shared custody between a toxic narcissistic parent and a non-narcissistic parent, it can be extremely challenging. Odds are that the divorce is contentious and the custody battle arduous, and the time with the toxic parent in the absence of the healthier parent can become quite taxing on the child. Without the protection of the other parent, the toxic parent may become even more abusive or rageful, or may force children quickly into new blended families because the narcissists are not good at being alone. they will often quickly jump into new relationships. The fallout of messy custody agreements and growing up in two homes that are run by very different sets of rules is highly destabilizing for a child and fosters a sense of instability well into adulthood. The aftermath of having a narcissistic parent. Not all narcissistic parents are created alike. Some are publicly indulgent and do not respect boundaries well. They are overly invested and involved in their children's lives, or at least superficially, are controlling, and can be critical when the children do not behave the way they want them to. Some are completely disengaged, and the children are viewed at best as nuisances. And the children are viewed at best as nuisances. And it can be even worse with parents being verbally abusive when the children are not exactly as they want them to be. Narcissism and the toxic symptomology associated with it is literally the opposite of the characteristics that make for a good parent. Ultimately, narcissistic and toxic parents miss the boat in providing their children with a sense of autonomy, self-efficacy, self-regulation, connection, attachment, safety, security, and unconditional love and regard. Children who experience this type of parenting often carry a challenging legacy of varied patterns, including self-doubt, guilt, self-devaluation, poor frustration tolerance, and a tendency to try to appease other people, as well as a greater likelihood of choosing partners who tend to be narcissistic and toxic themselves. A chip off the old block. The fact is that narcissistic and toxic parents can and do have children who go on to become narcissistic and toxic adults. If you reflect on Chapter 5, How Not to Raise a Narcissist, you'll remember that ingredients such as not mirroring the child, providing only conditional love, modeling entitlement, and other bad behavior, allowing the child to get caught up in the parent's grandiosity, and providing the child with inconsistent attention are the handiwork of a narcissistic or toxic parent. As a result, narcissist beget narcissist. In some ways, it makes sense. The children do not have an opportunity to learn about their emotional world. They learn they are valued only for superficial qualities and achievements. They are loved conditionally, and they are tremendously insecure. Here's the rub. Odds are, if you are a toxic person or a narcissist, you are not reading this book. However, throughout the years I have worked in this area, I have received countless emails from people and worked with numerous clients who come clean and say, I am a narcissist. I am cold. I am calculating. I lack empathy, and I want to be a better person. They will describe their childhood at the hand of a cold, distant, and toxic parent, mother, father, or both, and will, as an adult, reflect on the damage it has brought to them in their close relationships. Those close to them often view this statement as a manipulation, and it can be. But when I hear that clinically, I inform them that self-reflection and insight are important first steps. If a narcissist is not willing to acknowledge his or her patterns, then you are sunk and nothing can be done, and that it will be an arduous journey. It can be difficult to watch because their narcissism is a challenging, if not impossible, boulder to move. Although they are committed to changing under conditions of stress, loss, and/or insecurity, their typical patterns often kick in. This, then, is a tragic legacy of narcissistic and toxic parenting. It often generates a new generation of narcissists, a new generation hobbled by insecurity, with behavior that harms themselves and other people. As this trend bucks up in our culture and our world at large, this isn't just about larger-than-life politicians and reality TV stars sharing their shameless antics. This is about psychological damage to an entire generation and to those who may come into close contact with them. The takeaway: toxic parents. Everyone I interviewed offered up advice they wish they had received or taken earlier. They shared guidance that they were living by and that they felt had significant improvement in their lives. Trust yourself. Do not second guess yourself. Find a good therapist who understands narcissism. Establish and maintain boundaries and be aware that you will be more vulnerable to toxic people than people who may not have had toxic parents. Be judicious about whom you allow into your life. Learn to take care of yourself. because your parents did not adequately take care of you. Don't take the words or actions of the narcissistic parent personally. Distance yourself. If you are a young person, find a trusted, safe, and supportive adult who may be able to provide some insight. There is a painful recognition that you become an orphan if you make this mental switch of letting your parent go. Get the help you need to work through this. Read books and obtain knowledge. Maintain healthy relationships, as those may become a key source of self-esteem. Remember, this is not your fault. There is no right strategy, but you can master this situation. You are not forever defined by it. And this becomes an opportunity to parent yourself in a way that you never were parented. The following strategies can help. Number 1, recognize that your parent is not going to change. You are no longer 8 years old and waiting for your parents to get it right. As an adult, you may still be repeating that cycle, getting frustrated that your parents do not listen to you, or that they criticize you or invalidate you. It's who they are. If you are going to keep your parents around, then adjust your perceptions and acknowledge that they will never change, especially as they age. With older age, your parent may become even more brittle and angry, so be prepared. Remember the concept of radical acceptance raised in the previous chapter. Oh, this is how it is. Stop fighting it, fully accept it, and proceed accordingly. Number 2, manage your expectations. It's the mantra for dealing with any toxic or narcissistic people. If you decide to keep them in your life, ratchet down your expectations. That doesn't mean you will never get disappointed or hurt, but hopefully you will not be blindsided, which can feel worse. Some of this is about acceptance. Many people struggle with the ideal balance act with perhaps having to accept that their parent did the best they could given their circumstances. But that does not mean they have to endure their parents' ongoing invalidating behavior. It's okay to practice acceptance, even compassionate acceptance, but simultaneously avoid engaging with them and maintain realistic expectations. Number 3, set boundaries. It can be difficult to do this, but it is the only way to survive a toxic relationship with a parent. It may require a range of methods: time limits on phone calls, hours he or she can call you, having your parent or yourself stay in a hotel during visits, or having certain topics you do not discuss. It can also be more difficult, meaning you have to make difficult decisions, such as not having toxic parents attend certain events, because you know they may mar the event. If you are a parent, you may also need to set boundaries for your toxic parents' time with access to your children. Number 4, get therapy. There is no real way around this. Through good work with a good therapist, you can address the patterns you experience and devise strategies to ensure that these patterns do not keep repeating in other relationships in your adult life, as well as address patterns such as self-doubt, anxiety, and self-devaluation. Number 5, be mindful of how these patterns are impacting your life presently. In many ways, having a toxic parent means that you have to be deeply tuned into yourself, mindful and aware when selecting a partner. Many people with toxic and narcissistic parents almost reflectively choose an abusive partner and write off more loving and empathetic partners as boring. It can be the fight of your lifetime to let go of those old scripts and avoid choosing an avatar of your toxic parent as your new partner. You may also be more vulnerable to sticking it out with an abusive supervisor or boss, or a dismissive or a callous friend. Number 6, engage in self-preservation. Do not bring up certain topics with your parents. Do not make them privy to sensitive or important events in your life, especially if you know you are still vulnerable to criticism. Stop looking for their approval. It hasn't come yet, and it won't come now. Number 7, build in buffer zones around the times you need to see your parent. If you have a lunch date with them, take a moment before you go into the restaurant or their house to engage in some self-talk and remind yourself to manage your expectations, but also build some time in on the back end, because no matter how well you do manage your expectations, they will still manage to get under your skin. Take a moment, breathe, let it go, and get on with your day. Number 8, and the final one, keep your family drama off social media. I think I messed up with this. I was recently shown a particularly toxic interaction the family had about what appeared to be a narcissistic parent, in which various adult children were parroting that their father was dead to them. Followers on social media actually thought the old man was dead, and when it was found out to be dramatic histrionics, the entire thread looked tacky. It is passive-aggressive to air family drama on social media. The narcissistic parent won't get it, or will launch an even more toxic counterattack. In addition, it is at best uncomfortable for anyone who may be following your post. It may be uncomfortable for other family members who are not involved in the social media tantrum. The end of that chapter. So what did you guys think? Get in the comments and let me know what you think. I feel like she was reading my mail, y'all. She was telling my story. This is all the things that I was discerning in my father, all the behaviors that I saw in him. So when I read this book, I felt validated. I felt like my experience was understood, that someone knew exactly what I was going through. So let me know, do you feel like this was exactly like your experience with your narcissistic parent? Have you cut your narcissistic parent off? Have you thought about going no contact? Have you thought about divorcing your parent? She also mentioned that in here. You guys have heard me talk about that several times, about divorcing my father. So what are your thoughts? Let me know what you are discerning about this book. Like I told you guys, I highly recommend this book. It's called Don't You Know Who I Am? And that is like the mantra of the narcissist. It's like they say, don't you know who I am? I'm sure I have several recordings of my father saying that exact line. And then subtitle is How to Stay Sane in an Era of Narcissism, Entitlement, and Incivility. So go ahead and grab this book. It's by Dr. Ramani Durvasula. And if you are experiencing a toxic and narcissistic relationship, be it a parent or anyone else, a boss, a friend, then let me know in the comments. Thank you guys for tuning into Reading with Dolores. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye for now.
If you watched this series and thought, something here feels uncomfortably familiar, that is your discernment waking up. The next step is not another video. It is clarity. The Decision Audit Toxic Parent Edition can provide that clarity. This audit helps you decide whether to keep full contact, limit contact, or step back from a toxic parent. Based on evidence, not guilt. You are not deciding how to treat them. You are deciding how much access they get to you. Download the Decision Audit Toxic Parent Edition today. Link in bio.